you can see who's who of Elizabeth.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk to her about how she wants to handle the Q&A. She'll pitch how she'll talk to her.
Well, you have fun. You have fun. Okay, I'll see you later.
Oh, well, thanks for. You're not gonna learn anything. Okay.
I can't see. Well, it might be
Right.
Maria down there.
Okay. When you go down that aisle?
I think so, and I would just, or if you don't concern with you, but I would just one second bring it up. Yeah, like repping yeah, that's true. You are fully in it.
I am.
It comes back. I mean, I think, right, I mean, I'm trying to let it be for a fuel. I am applying for that.
Camera actually.
Now, when never introduced me. I'm Brendan. Brendan, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Trying to find me. Yeah.
Good evening. It is a good evening. It's not as good an evening as July 26, 1990 was, but it is a good evening to remember what was accomplished then and what has been accomplished since then. So I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the Visitors Center. It seats 400. I understand we have a lot of people lost in the Capitol. For those of you who have been around the Capitol at all, you know it's easy to get lost in. And we think they will be coming in. But we're going to see the film first. But I want to say something about a few people who are here. First, the godfather of ADA, Judy Woodruff. I don't want everything to go to Coelho's head right away, you know. Tony Coelho is somebody that I had met the first time in 1980, and there was a member of Congress, Gladys Spellman, who'd had a cardiac arrest and went into a coma, and it was questionable as to whether she would be able to serve. And that's when I first met Tony, who had just become the chairman of the DCCC and was responsible for people, Democrats, being elected to the Congress of the United States. And I was his first contested election. There was one before that in March with when Siljander left. But I was his first contested race, so that's how we met, and he worked with me and was very helpful. Sometimes he didn't think I was as helpful as he was being. But in any event, he decided to leave the Congress in June of 1989. And he called me in because we had become dear and fast friends, one of my best friends in the Congress, now one of my best friends in life, called me in and said, Steny, I'm going to leave. And I want you to do something for me. And I said, what is that, Tony? He said, I want you to shepherd the ADA to passage. It had been introduced in the previous Congress, introduced in that Congress. And I said, Tony, I'd be glad to do that, and I will do it. And I hope I can do it anywhere close to as well as you would do it. And when I leave the Congress, and I tell people, in 2036, I'm 86 years of age. What do you think about 2036? When I leave the Congress, there will be two things of which I will be most proud. People ask you, and one is my work on behalf of Soviet Jewry and their ability to immigrate to either Israel or to wherever they wanted to go, and the reunification of families. But the second, not necessarily in importance, will be the role that I was given the opportunity by Tony to play in the Americans with Disabilities Act. There were, as you know, 43 million people at that point in time. We counted 43 million, 45 million people who were going through life with a disability that had an impact on their ability to function without reasonable accommodations, without access. And now there are more than that, and more people are learning that they have a disability they didn't think they had. Steve, the example I use is Abe Poland, who was a good friend of mine, owned the Washington Wizards, never asked me to play center. And the reason he didn't is because I'm 6 feet tall, not 7 feet tall. So that was a disability. The curb cuts. Who uses the curb cuts the most? Bicyclists and people pushing carriages. Do the disability community use them? Yes. But they're advantage to a broad breadth of America. So, Tony, I thank you for giving me that opportunity. Now, Debbie Dingell, I think, is going to be here. She co-chairs the Bipartisan Disability Caucus. And when she gets here, I'll say something about her. But the second person I want to recognize is that we worked in a very bipartisan way. Clearly, Democrats and Republicans had disabilities, and independents and all other people had disabilities. Excuse me. This was not a partisan issue. Tom Foley, at Tony's suggestion, appointed me to honcho the ADA. And he needed to do that so the chairman of the committee would not think I was trying to do their job. They're very sensitive. Not as sensitive today now because it's a more centralized system than it was then, but they were very sensitive, and that was important. And one of the best members of Congress with whom I've ever served, and one of the great people of the Congress, was a guy named Bob Michael. And Bob Michael asked Steve Bartlett, who was on the Education Committee, to work with me on this bipartisan effort. And I tell people that I spent about 100 hours at least working on this issue, because although it got a very big vote at the end, it was a struggle to convince people that people could in fact have reasonable accommodations and make sure that people were included, not excluded, and how much that would cost and how much difficulty that would be and what it would do to their business. And he appointed Steve Bartlett. Steve Bartlett became a dear friend. Steve Bartlett was from Texas. Steve Bartlett became the mayor of Dallas after he left the Congress of the United States. But Steve Bartlett was a giant in convincing Republicans that this was the thing we ought to do. And as I say, it passed handily in both the House and the Senate. But it, at the end, looked much easier than it was in the preface to that end. I also want to represent Hannah Gazit. Hannah, where are you? Is Hannah here? Hi. Oh, we were talking Hannah, I'm sorry. Who is the producer and director at PBS of American Experience. And this is, of course, a hallmark of American Experience, called one of the great civil rights bills of all time, and the greatest civil rights bill since the 1964 and 65 bills passed under President Johnson. And I also want to thank Judy Woodruff for being with us. Judy Woodruff is an extraordinary reporter, an extraordinary human being, and she and her husband Al Hunt, who I think many of you also know, a wonderful journalist, has been very, very involved in raising consciousness about those with disabilities, and very focused on the inclusion of those who would otherwise be excluded, either because the door was too narrow or because we didn't have somebody, if you're hard of hearing, to make sure you know what I'm saying. Or though you may not want to hear what I'm saying, so you may not think that's a reasonable accommodation. But I welcome all of you to this viewing of this film, Change, Not Charity, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The title of this documentary is an apt because ADA led to a massive change, not only in the law, but in our society and in the psychology of our people. Have we gotten to where we want to be? We have not. We don't have enough employment for those with disabilities in particular. But we have made very substantial progress, particularly on access. It was not part of the ADA per se. Ed Markey had scrolling, if you're hard of hearing, on your TV. So many things that we see advantage others as well. For instance, there's some people that speak very quickly on TV, and the scrolling across makes it much easier for me to understand, to get it, to hear what, because I'll say, what did they say? And then I'll read it. It changed the physical landscape of America, certainly, widening doors, building ramps, installing audible warnings, and requiring Braille translations, and other accommodations. Now, somebody's coming in now who I want to stop and recognize, because I talked about that 100 hours. Ralph Neese just walked in, helping somebody. Ralph Neese is a reasonable accommodation. I think you dropped a pin, Ralph. Somebody dropped a pin. But who spent many of those hours with us. And Ralph, I thank you for that. There's so many of you in this room, so I'm not going to mention everybody who have made a difference, because I tell people all the time, it was those with disabilities who had the courage to come forward and to confront members of Congress with what their experiences in life were that made the difference. That's why the vote was a big vote. Not because of Steve Bartlett or Steny H. We were certainly helpful. But it was those of you who spent hours and days and weeks and months and had spent years convincing members of Congress that they needed to act to make America accessible to all. It changed the lives of tens of millions of people with disabilities, allowing them to live with greater independence, dignity, and opportunity. We still have work to do on those three issues. Crucially, the ADA changed the hearts and minds of the American people and how they perceived the disability community. Not everybody's. We still have work to do. I keep emphasizing that. It helped alleviate the stigma and discrimination Americans with disabilities faced in everything from housing to employment to health care to transportation, which was one of the toughest areas on transportation. We were able to get the ADA across the finish line with bipartisan support because members of the disability community courageously spoke up. Some of them spoke pretty loudly. Not necessarily audibly, but loudly. They refused to be ignored. They exposed the inequities of our society. They demanded change and brought Democrats and Republicans together to achieve it. Steve Bartlett is the example of that and the leader of that effort. This documentary captures their stories expertly, stories that needed to be told. In doing so, it documents their successful struggle for a more equal America and a more perfect union. That is why we formed our Constitution, to establish a more perfect union. I tell people that those truths in the Declaration may be self-evident of opportunity for life, liberty, and happiness, but they are not self-executing. They may be self-evident, but they're not self-executing. All of you in this room made possible the execution I thank the documentary's producer, who I've already mentioned, Hannah Gazit, director Jim Albrecht, and the rest of the talented team for their work. I also, again, thank my friend Tony Coelho. Tony, you gave me the opportunity of a lifetime, and I will never forget that. Debbie Dingell, who work so hard on disability issues, Steve Bartlett, Judy Woodruff, who will all be participating in our panel as soon as I shut up and we see the film. It was an honor, as I said, when I leave the Congress, whenever that is, and I will look back on my career, the ADA will be number one on the opportunity that I had, and I am proud of the fact, working with Steve Bartlett, working with Tony, Ralph Neese, so many of you in this room, that we were successful. America is a better nation for having done so. Let's run the film.
We're going to see how tall this podium is. Can you all see me? Great. Thank you so much, Congressman. Everyone, my name is Maria Town. I serve as the president and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities. We are proud to be co-hosting this event with the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus. And I want to thank everyone who has joined us on the Zoom to witness the screening of this film, Change Not Charity. In talking about all of the people who contributed to the creation and ultimate passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Congressman is right. It is impossible to name everyone because in truth it was millions. Millions of disabled people who demanded more, who demanded better. But I do, especially because I lead the American Association of People with Disabilities, an organization partially founded by Justin Dart, I do have to quote Justin Dart when I talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act. He described the ADA as a promise to be kept. And he noted that it would not be easy to keep that promise. And truly, when I think about the ADA, among the many things I think about is the realization that from the moment it passed, it required education and defense. In the 35 years since its passage, almost every Congress has introduced a piece of legislation to weaken the ADA. While I cannot remember the ADA's passage, I was too young, I can remember when the ADA Amendments Act passed, because basically we had to get the band back together to tell the Supreme Court, no, no, no. We meant everyone. Everyone can benefit from the protections of this transformative civil rights law. Some of my favorite stories about what happened after the ADA passed are related to the call centers that were set up in the Department of Justice, and I believe Liz Savage is here, where people had to explain, like, no, this is not the American Dairy Association, this is not the American Dental Association, this is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And still today, 35 years later, we're getting asked questions like, well, doesn't the ADA have a list of disabilities? No. No. Disability is a broad category because it is a natural part of the human experience. And so personally, it's felt complicated for me to celebrate the ADA in this moment. And I share that with all of you because maybe you have felt that way too. Just in the past few months, we have seen numerous attempts to attack or roll back the ADA. We have seen numerous attempts to erode the public institutions that disabled people rely on to provide critical services and advocacy. You cannot call the ADA unless you're talking about an assistant district attorney. You cannot call the ADA, but you can call a protection and advocacy organization. You cannot call the ADA, but you can call a University Center for Excellence on Disabilities to provide you with necessary information and technical assistance. And so when I think about what it means to be a disabled person, part of what it means is having to defend our existence. We should not have to. We should not have to. But in keeping the promise of the ADA, we will, because we have. And although today looks very different than 1990, we are going to use the tactics we have at hand to continue to mobilize, to continue to educate, to continue to defend the Americans with Disabilities Act. Because in the spirit of Justin Dart, the ADA is a promise that we know will be hard to keep, but we will do our darndest to keep it so that other generations of disabled people know that a better future is possible. So thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Jim Lebrecht, Director of Change Not Charity, the Americans with Disabilities Act. I wish I could be with you in person for this special screening on Capitol Hill. I want to thank Congressman Hoyer for hosting, and all of you, members of Congress, community members, and advocates, for being here today. When I started work on this film, I thought I understood how the ADA was passed, but I quickly realized that there was way more to the story. What stood out for me was the central role played by the people of Dredif. Their strategy, their legal brilliance, and their persistence made passage of the ADA possible. And ADAPT's bold, uncompromising, direct action made sure the urgency of disability rights could not be ignored. The law would not have been passed without them. I was invited into this project by Shauna Gazit, who is credited as writer and producer, but who was truly my equal partner and more. Her vision shaped this film in profound ways. Our producers, Sarah Keeling and Hillary Steinman, brought incredible research skills and storytelling instincts. They uncovered angles and stories that made this film feel like a gripping political drama, because in truth, that's what it is. My disability is an essential part of my identity, and like millions of disabled people, I claim it with pride and with a strong sense of belonging to a larger community. Every culture deserves to know its history and to see it preserved and honored. I believe that we've accomplished this. I'm grateful that American Experience saw the importance of this story and gave it a home on PBS's signature history series. It places disability squarely within its canon of American history where it belongs. The ADA matters just as much now as it did 35 years ago. The intent of the ADA was to break down the walls of exclusion and to outlaw the kind of discrimination that kept the disabled from enjoying all the benefits that living in our great country affords. Our independence, our rights as human beings, benefit greatly from the civil rights protections the ADA promises. It is my hope that our film shows people how far the disabled have come, how the ADA benefits everyone, what we still need to work toward, and how destructive it would be to every American if these rights were taken away. Thank you for being here and for continuing the work to fulfill the promise of the ADA.
On March 13, 1990, disability activists from across the country occupied the rotunda of the Capitol to demand the passage of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. 1 in 4 Americans was living with a disability. Pent-up anger over discrimination, segregation, and isolation had led to this moment.
Did they get to have a career? Did they get to have a spouse? All of these questions, which we had for nearly a century shoved away, they weren't going to accept second-class status any longer.
We're going to be part of this country. We're going to be part of the community just like anybody else.
Who would ever thought that people with disabilities would actually be arrested for demonstrating? Oh, poor little cripples, right? That coming of the movement said, we're not going to hide in the shadows. We're coming out.
Access is our civil right. Access is our civil right.
For the protesters, access and opportunity should be a birthright. But opponents of the ADA lambasted it as unrealistic.
This was a civil rights bill that required massive amounts of changes that somebody had to pay for.
If passed, the Americans with Disabilities Act would be one of the most consequential civil rights bills in the nation's history.
Civil rights aren't given. You have to fight to get them, and then you have to fight to keep them.
We are live. We're coming to you from the Resort and Convention Center of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. This is the Jerry Lewis Labor Day Telethon.
At its height, the Muscular Dystrophy Telethon, hosted by beloved comedian Jerry Lewis, was watched by nearly half of the country. Broadcast over 21 non-stop hours, it raised hundreds of millions of dollars towards finding a cure for muscular dystrophy.
Here's $100,000 for good luck.
But not everyone welcomed the telethons.
My husband and I both had polio. We would hide. I mean, we didn't want to go anywhere on Labor Day weekend because everyone assumes that you had muscular dystrophy. Everyone assumes that you're part of the telethon. It was terrible.
We need lots of money, lots of love. Every penny you send in adds up to dollars.
Matter of fact, if you want to give $100 or more.
The telethon was really detested as a tool of using pity as a way to collect money. If you give us money, we're going to cure this poor, helpless kid of whatever their disability is.
In 1981, after more than 2 decades of huge TV ratings, a disabled lawyer named Evan Kemp published an editorial that stunned readers. With its emphasis on poster children, he wrote, "Telethons equate disability with total hopelessness."
When I was 5 and a half, I was chosen to be a poster child for March of Dimes. I was chosen because I was blonde, blue-eyed, and braced. I was like queen for a day. I was in the parade and on the float. I was in first grade, and March of Dimes had used my photo for a flyer to promote polio vaccines. My teacher says, "Oh, we have a flyer with Cynthia's photo on it." So she passes it back. And I wonder, what photo did they use? Was it the party photo? Was it this photo, that photo? And I got the flyer on my desk. I thought, oh my gosh. They used a photo of 2 kids running through a field. And it said this, and me in my party dress, and it said, "Not this." I was shocked. Even now when I speak it, I am horrified I wanted to crawl under my desk. So in an instant, I realized nobody wanted to be like me.
What's the matter?
That eye, staring at me.
Somebody's in there.
It's an animal!
The blockbuster 1939 movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, underscored the impossibility of blending into an able-bodied world.
When we see The Hunchback of Notre Dame, what you see is someone who wants to participate, but is pushed out, and he hides in the shadows. If you have a disability, is that what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to hide in the shadows?
Negative attitudes toward the disabled were formally sanctioned more than 100 years prior with the eugenics movement, an ideology that viewed disability through the distorted science of social Darwinism. Over half the states in the country had laws allowing compulsory sterilization. Alongside the rise of eugenics, cities across the United States began to pass what became known as the ugly laws.
In San Francisco, the law said if you were diseased, mutilated, that you shouldn't be on public display. It was out of sight, out of mind as public policy.
Doctors often advised families that the best place for the disabled child was in an institution, even encouraging them to never mention the child again. At dinner time, on February 2nd, 1972, millions of Americans watched in horror as TV reporter Geraldo Rivera exposed the conditions at the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island. Willowbrook was the largest institution in the country for children with developmental disabilities.
We toured building number 6. They were making a pitiful sound, the kind of mournful wail that it's impossible for me to forget.
Disabled people being treated, I don't think it would be allowed in the zoo for the animals now. It was a shock to the nation.
The Willowbrook expose ignited a national movement that would lift disability out of the shadows. In California, a group of disabled college students began to envision a new way forward. With a $250 donation from the local Rotary Club, they formed CIL, the Center for Independent Living in Berkeley.
This is about your membership. Are you going to be able to count?
If you needed government assistance, there were people that could help you navigate that Byzantine system.
We find attendants for disabled people in our target area. We have counseling, transportation service.
If your wheelchair was broken, there were people who could teach you how to fix it. So for the first time in many people's lives, they were given the opportunity to dream, where someone would ask, what do you want to do with your life?
The center became a magnet for young people across the country. Mary Lou Breslin immediately saw the potential of the organization.
I quit my job, gave up my retirement plan, and went to work for CIL.
There she met Pat Wright, who was legally blind.
I did the trek that a lot of disabled people do. I went from an East Coast lifestyle to living in Berkeley during the 60s. The civil rights movement, the women's movement, and that's how I became radicalized about ownership of disability.
In the cauldron of political awakening, another CIL member, Judy Heumann, would inspire the burgeoning activists to demand entry into the mainstream of American life.
I had this image of the American dream. If I worked hard at school and if I really studied and if I did everything that I was told to do, I would be able to go out and then get a job.
When Judy was denied the right to teach, despite her qualifications, she sued the New York City Board of Education and won. Eager to make an impact beyond the classroom, a few years later, she became CIL's deputy director.
CIL is run by persons with various kinds of physical disabilities, blindness, deafness, persons with mental retardation. Disabled people have begun to band much more closely together to form what I would define as the movement.
The start of that movement would coincide with an unforeseen development for people with disabilities. On September 26, 1973, President Richard Nixon signed what most considered a modest update to the 55-year-old Rehabilitation Act, providing services for veterans. But at the very end of a 190-page document, in a section marked 504, was a surprising addition. A staffer added 46 words that barred discrimination against the disabled in federally funded institutions. The innocuous language went mostly unnoticed, except by the disability community.
504 was the first time that the word discrimination and disability were linked. But same treatment, which was the model for race and sex discrimination, was not going to work for people with disabilities. In order to have equal opportunity, there had to be accommodations.
Everything was architecturally inaccessible virtually everywhere in the world. The restrooms in my high school were not accessible, so it wasn't possible actually to use the restroom during the day. But I finally figured out that I could go into a parking lot, put my foot up on a bumper, slide out to the edge of my chair and pee on the ground. And I did that for years and years. There were barriers every single step of the way.
Translating the concept embodied in the 46 words into practice would be up to the Department of Health Education and Welfare, HEW. Within months, staffers readied a broad set of regulations for approval by the head of the department. But nothing happened. Disability activists would watch in dismay as two successive administrations, Nixon and Ford, did not move forward on implementing Section 504.
I love everybody here. You've been great to me. Thank you very much.
When Jimmy Carter was elected president, hopes were raised once again.
Joe Califano was the secretary of HEW. They have promised us they will sign this regulation. Joe Califano takes a look at it, and I worked for him. I know he said, why should I issue something that the Republican administration wrote and they wouldn't even put it out? What do you want me to do? I'm not going to do this right now. And the disability community had had enough.
On April 5th, 1977, activists representing a full range of disabilities came together for a historic show of unity. They held demonstrations at HEW headquarters in Washington, D.C., and at regional offices from coast to coast. Their demand, that Joseph Califano sign the 504 regulations immediately.
I told my mother, I'm just going to this rally about disabilities. I got there, started listening to Judy and other people, and they started talking about different disability rights, and I was hooked.
The protests lasted at most a day or two, except in San Francisco, where over 100 activists marched inside the federal building, occupied the 4th floor, and refused to leave.
It's the first really militant thing that disabled people have ever done. We feel like we're building a real social movement.
We didn't know if the police were going to come. We didn't know where we were going to get our food, our blankets. We didn't know who was going to turn me over or who was going to make sure I took my medicine. Churches began to come out and help us. The Black Panthers brought food, they brought clothing, they brought medical supplies.
This is what happens after you've been inside the HEW for how long?
What is it, 12 13 days, now 13 days.
Joe Califano was hearing from members of Congress, what are you doing? This is not a good image. But Califano was adamant. He was not going to be bullied by this. He was going to take his time, and so we were at loggerheads.
It was time to be mad as hell, and I can't take it anymore. We decided to send a delegation to Washington. We flew to Dulles Airport. We didn't have a way of getting anywhere, so the International Association of Machinists rented a huge truck. They loaded us all in, and we rode in the back of the truck to a church in Washington, D.C.
The first night that we got to D.C., I said, we got to do something now. Let's have a candlelight vigil. Let's get in Califano's face and let him know. They said, well, he's not at his office. I said, well, we're not going to his office. We're going to his house. Judy said, that's a great idea. So we went to his house. I've never heard so many sirens. Everybody came out. And they watched us do a candlelight vigil for 504, and it blew everybody's mind.
I get summoned to Califano's office. He is furious. He said, in the worst days of racial discrimination, no one ever protested at the home of all these terrible racists, and they come to my home to protest. It just infuriated him.
1, 2, 3, 4, put it in here for 504. 1, 2, 3, 4, put it in here for 504. 1, 2, 3, 4, put it in here.
Miles, could I ask why you did not meet with the demonstrators this week?
Well, there's an illegal demonstration going on in San Francisco, and I just don't think it's appropriate to do that.
I understand you agreed to meet with them at Kansas, is that true?
Having reached an impasse, the protesters returned to San Francisco, determined to continue the sit-in. It was now the longest nonviolent occupation of a federal building in U.S. history. Finally, after nearly a month, the bad publicity forced Califano's hand. With approval from the White House, he signed the 504 regulations.
35 million handicapped Americans won a big victory today. From now on, every institution, every school or hospital or college which gets money from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare will have to provide full facilities for the handicapped. They will have 3 years in which to do this. Ultimately, all institutions receiving any federal support will have to do the same thing.
I'm very happy. Yes, this shows that the country is waking up.
When I heard it was signed, it was like a great relief. We had finally opened the door to make sure disabled persons were actually heard. It was so memorable. I can tell you when the sun was, and I can tell you how the wind was, and I can tell you all of that stuff.
The euphoria over the 504 victory, however, would be short-lived.
The Supreme Court handed what may be a major legal setback to handicapped Americans today. The court ruled that educational institutions are not required to make significant changes in their programs to accommodate the handicapped.
Within 2 years, it became evident that the 46 words in the Rehabilitation Act would not be enough to protect the regulations from a barrage of lawsuits. Activists, already shaken by the legal defeats, viewed the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 with foreboding.
Ronald Reagan's philosophy of government was limiting government as much as possible, and Section 504 was one of the first targets.
Wasting no time, Reagan established a task force aimed at slashing regulations and put Vice President George H.W. Bush in charge.
But we really believe that the American people are saying with a rather united voice, we've gone too far in the federal government regulating things.
The task force listed 27 existing regulations it wants to open up for review and possible change. Some examples: education of handicapped children. There is no cost estimate, the task force noted. Requiring cities to adapt buses and subways for the handicapped. Very expensive.
I recall the day that I was asked to go to a meeting where my job was to defend Section 504 from people who wanted to get rid of it. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders.
People with disabilities all over the country were like, wait a minute, we just got our civil rights. I have the chills just even saying it. We just got our civil rights, and you're saying we're going to go back? No, we're not going back.
We realized that the only way to stop it was to show that people with disabilities could be a political force.
We recognized that there needed to be a national defense fund for people with disabilities.
In Berkeley, a small team spun off from the Center for Independent Living and formed DREDF, Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, teasingly calling themselves the Dreadfuls.
That was part of the reputation we wanted to develop. And not only were we into law reform and policy, but we were a political reckoning that we had to deal with.
In short order, DREDF brought on attorney Arlene Mayerson.
We had a warehouse across the street from Center for Independent Living. It was just as grassroots as you can possibly imagine.
DREDF began conceiving of an overarching piece of legislation that would cement the rights of the disabled in the same way civil rights laws had done for race and gender, expanding beyond federally funded organizations into every aspect of American life.
We realized if we wanted to make a difference in terms of advancing civil rights, we would need to open a Washington office.
It's the first problem we have. We all loved living in Berkeley. So we decided I had blonde hair and Arlene had pearls.
I had pearls. And you're presentable in a way that would be useful in Washington.
The DREDF team arrived in D.C. on a shoestring budget, with no place to live, no office, and no access to the corridors of power. In a lucky break, Evan Kemp, the man who had written the scathing op-ed against the Jerry Lewis telethon, came to their aid. More than a decade older, Kemp was part of the D.C. establishment.
He was a strong Republican out of Cleveland, Ohio. He showed up for work every day in a suit and tie. No one quite knew what to make of us, but Evan found us very entertaining.
In a surprising twist, it was Evan Kemp's hobby that gave DREDF entrance into the highest ranks of Washington politics. Kemp played bridge with Boyden Gray, White House General Counsel, and a close confidant of Vice President Bush.
The bridge games really facilitated the deepening of the relationship. Boyden's understanding of disability, I'm absolutely convinced, came about as a result of those conversations. Evan Kemp helped us build relationships with people who proved to be key players in Washington.
It wasn't long before the back-channel connections paid off. In January 1982, DREDF received leaked information confirming that Section 504 programs were on the chopping block. The team quickly mobilized.
We sent out alerts. And when I say we sent out alerts, I mean we, typed them and then Xerox them. There weren't a lot of mechanisms to get the word out. Like I said to my students, you put a stamp on and then you put it in a mailbox.
Tens of thousands of letters arrived at the White House.
So one time we were walking into a meeting at the White House and they said, "Whoa, We've gotten 40,000 letters about a deregulation that we've never even announced.
Faced with a deluge of letters and phone calls, Vice President Bush relented. Section 504 was declared off-limits. Although Dredef had thwarted an attack on the regulations this time, the need for a fail-safe civil rights bill became more urgent. The young activists had no experience getting legislation off the ground, let alone a bill of such magnitude. Then they joined forces with Justin Dart.
Well, I always believed in fighting for civil rights, and I've done that since I was 20 years old. Nobody is going to give us rights. We are going to take rights.
Justin Dart, the son of a major Republican fundraiser, was in a unique position to navigate Washington's inner circle.
Justin just had a way of getting in to see anybody he wanted to see. He always had a cowboy hat, light-colored suits, and boots, and he would always look you straight in the eye. When you got the Justin look, you knew you better pay attention to what he was saying.
As vice chair of the National Council on the Handicapped, Dart reached out to Steve Bartlett, a first-term Republican congressman from Texas, who was overseeing a committee with jurisdiction over disability rights.
We laid out an agenda to identify barriers to people with disabilities and present a report for what to do to remove these barriers.
On his own initiative, Dart and his wife Yoshiko crisscrossed the country in an old beat-up pickup truck to hold town meetings with people with disabilities. A grueling undertaking in a country that was mostly inaccessible.
He went to every state in this country and met with people with disabilities and asked them questions about discrimination that affected them in their everyday lives.
We would sit there and listen until they got finished. Nobody got turned away. We'd sit there till 9 o'clock at night.
Dart's team wove thousands of examples of hardship and discrimination into a groundbreaking roadmap for disability legislation. In 1986, he presented the report to Vice President George H.W. Bush, hoping he would bring it to President Reagan's attention. That report, named Toward Independence, made clear that in order to achieve equal opportunity, the world would have to change.
For the handicapped, most big city subway and rail stations are a jungle of insurmountable stairs and gates, and with the exception of the relatively few buses that kneel at the front to lower the first step, surface transportation is not much better.
The biggest arguments were that the lifts would cost way too much, or that they couldn't design a lift for the type of bus they use. And a lot of it was about money. A lot of it. That's sadly the thing about us as disabled people. There is a cost to our existence.
The Toward Independence report sat on a shelf for the next 2 years. It had been more than a decade since Secretary Califano signed Section 504, and many of the regulations had yet to be enforced.
What do you want? Access! What do you want? Access! We will access!
Angry activists took to the streets. The most militant group was ADAPT, American Disabled for Accessible Public Transit. Its members were infamous for chaining their wheelchairs to buses and forming blockades at bus depots.
Let's go! Let's go!
It's the only way that can be gone about by people with very little money, no rights, and being ignored.
Come on, let's go.
The disability movement was becoming bolder and more resolute. In March of 1988, members of Congress were confronted with a massive protest just a mile from the Capitol. Students at Gallaudet University, the premier university for the deaf, were outraged that a hearing person had been selected to lead the institution.
Right away, they closed the gates. They hot-wired buses and blocked the gates. It was huge. Everybody on campus was part of the protest.
In its 124-year history, the university had never appointed a deaf president.
I believe that once we have someone who can help me learn the sign language, and as I continue to learn and read about the education of the deaf, I will be in a position of engaging with the campus community.
The process leading up to that selection was careful and reasoned. The board will listen.
You can't teach someone what it feels like to be deaf. You can't teach that. A hearing person can't learn.
We deaf people have our right. And now it's time that we need a deaf person. We don't want one. We need one.
I. King Jordan, a dean at the university who was deaf, had been a leading candidate for the job. Though he was ultimately not selected, he was expected to back up the board's decision.
I was in a difficult position. They wanted me to say that I support the Board of Trustees. It was very emotional to realize that DEAF is a lot more important than DEAN. And so that, I knew that I had to support the students.
Yesterday, I gave a statement recognizing the legal authority of the board to name the president of Gallaudet University. My personal reaction to the board's decision was and is anger. I publicly affirm my support for demands.
I looked out at all the students and staff and people cheering. Everybody was delighted. So I said to myself, you made the right decision.
After a week of nonstop news coverage, the Board of Trustees reversed course and appointed Jordan to be the university's first deaf president.
And I must give the highest praise to the students of Gallaudet for showing us exactly, even now, how one can seize an idea with such force that it becomes a reality.
The message sent by the Gallaudet victory did not go unnoticed on Capitol Hill. Soon after, Justin Dart persuaded 2 legislators to introduce a landmark bill called the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA.
So it's with great pride that I join with all those in this room today to announce the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Vastly more far-reaching than the 504 regulations, this legislation would demand compliance from private institutions across the country. The reaction to the bill was fierce and immediate. Opponents called it the bankruptcy bill.
The idea of how much would a business have to spend to make its property and its services accessible, the answer in the ADA was to the point of bankruptcy. That was a bridge too far.
Did we think the bill had a realistic chance of passing when we introduced it? We didn't care. We wanted to get it out. And so that was sort of our pie in the sky.
The bill never even made it to the floor.
But it was very important that it be introduced. Why? Because there was about to be a presidential campaign.
At the start of his campaign, George H.W. Bush set himself apart from Ronald Reagan by promising a kinder, gentler conservatism.
I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure the disabled are included in the mainstream. For too long, they've been left out, but they're not going to be left out anymore.
Bush's embrace of disability rights was heartfelt. His favorite uncle was a polio survivor, but it was also smart politics. People with disabilities made up a potential voting bloc of more than 40 million people.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
With a public nod from the president, activists pressed for the relaunch of the ADA. Two Democratic senators, Ted Kennedy and Tom Harkin, agreed to sponsor the new bill. Pat Wright took the reins of the negotiations.
Pat Wright was the general for the Americans with Disabilities Act. She had an amazing Rolodex that she would work tirelessly to convince people to do what she thought they had to do. And it was tough.
It was a chess game. So you try and figure out what the actual move is, what's the fear, what's the stereotype, and you move your piece that addresses that.
The challenge now was how to avoid the pitfalls that had brought down the first ADA.
Over the summer, the business community, the chambers of commerce, all the groups coalesced to say, whoa. And they organized, and then we had opposition.
It was those mom and pop National Federation of Independent Businesses that were told they were going to go bankrupt.
The Americans with Disabilities Act would require new restaurants, stores, and other public accommodations to be accessible. Small businesses complained the bill's requirements are too vague.
The uncertainty of the bill, the uncertainty in terms of what they have to do and what the costs are, and the possibility of ending up in endless litigation is what we find most frightening.
Negotiations in the Senate went on for months. The stumbling block always came down to the specter of overwhelming cost.
Reasonable accommodation became the magic two words, and two of the most important words in the Americans with Disabilities Act. Because you could accommodate as long it was a reasonable accommodation.
Are there any other senators who have not yet cast their vote?
Opposition crumbled in the Senate. By the fall of 1989, the Senate submitted a draft of the bill to the House for their approval.
House will be in order.
Democrat Steny Hoyer and Republican Steve Bartlett agreed to helm the bipartisan effort.
There were 4 committees. Each of those committees had their own opinions on their section of the bill. It was like standing at the base of the Himalayas and said, okay, now we're going to climb Mount Everest. You guys get started. It was a massive effort that everything had to be negotiated, every word.
The number of people watching were very large, whether it was the airline industry, the food industry, transportation industry. The stakes were high because the interest was high and the consequences were high.
Still alarmed by the potential cost, outside groups for both the public and private sectors sent in scores of lobbyists to derail the bill. Once again, the legislation was in limbo. Frustrated by the inaction, ADAPT summoned protesters to Washington. On the morning of March 12th, activists led a crowd of over 500 protesters on a march to the White House.
Like, I was seeing, you know, like crowds and crowds. I was almost overwhelmed by it. I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm a part of an organization that is moving mountains, making changes.
The protesters, now numbering more than 700, proceeded to the Capitol.
We are here today representing 43 million Americans with disabilities. ADA will pave the way for the emancipation of hundreds of millions throughout the world from the bondage of segregation.
We chanted, access is a civil right. Access is a civil right.
Access is a civil right. Access is a civil right.
At the base of the Capitol, protesters parked their wheelchairs, dropped to the ground, and started dragging themselves up the 83 marble steps.
I sat down and I back-butted up the rest of the stairs. Going up, it released those feelings of anger, of, damn it, I'm in a position that I gotta do this. That we have to do this as disabled people. That we have to do this to make y'all see.
One of those people was a little girl who I think was about 8 years old.
She's a cute little kid, and she's crawling up those steps.
And her mom was next to her, and her mom kept telling me, "You don't have to do this, you don't have to keep going." And she said, "Oh, yes, I do. I want to do this."
And you could see the, oh, I got goosebumps. You could see the future of America.
Once I got up to the top, I'm like, whoa, we're doing it. We're really doing it. We're like crawling into history. That's what I felt.
But while images of the crawl were still fresh in the public's mind, their next plan was set for inside the Capitol.
Like we was just tourists going in, basking in the Capitol, People's House. Till we got to the rotunda. At that point, we stopped. It was it. There was no going. It was like, okay, the ruse is over.
Are we here to take a tour?
ADAPT members formed concentric circles, handcuffing themselves to wheelchairs and chaining them together.
They couldn't be moved, which Speaker Foley got very upset about. And he said to me, "This is just going too far." And I got that.
My name is Steny Hoyer, and I'm one of the principal sponsors of the ADA bill, as I think probably some of you know.
I wasn't enthusiastic about it either because it made members angry. Who do these people think they are? But after you get by the who do these people think they are, then you get to what are they saying?
First of all, welcome to the Capitol. On the question of the ADA bill, it is a priority for passage in this session of the Congress, and it is proceeding through committees at this time.
What I would say is that you already had time to do that. And what we're here to say is that 24 hours isn't the proper amount of time. What is?
I'll probably give you an estimate that the bill will be passed sometime in late April or early May.
Our time has come. Pass this bill now.
The Capitol Police were sent in to arrest the protesters. But the one accessible elevator only fit 1 or 2 wheelchairs at a time. Ironically, It took the Capitol Police hours to remove the protesters one by one.
When the dust cleared, there was 104 of us arrested. I was number 81.
In the wake of the protests, Hoyer and Bartlett could sense something had changed.
It was sort of the one real boost that we needed to get out of the slump. That enabled Congressman Hoyer on the House side to tell these committee chairmen, did you just see that? Yes, we got to get this done.
3 months later, a House version of the bill was ready for a vote.
This will be a 5-minute vote.
People started voting, and the numbers were changing so fast, it was like looking at a gas pump when you buy gas, you know, brrr, they were just spinning.
We are on the brink of enacting an independence bill for the disabled of America. They will henceforth, I think, look to this day and the day when the President of the United States signs this bill as the Independence Day for those who have been disabled.
The next day, the House version was sent back to the Senate for ratification, the final stop before it went to the President for his signature.
Mr. President.
Senator Harkin addressed his fellow senators in American Sign Language, a first in the history of the Senate, dedicating his speech to his deaf brother.
Pat and I said, you know, this is so monumental. This is so far-reaching. If we enact this bill, it will be the most important civil rights bill since 1965.
When the final votes were tallied, the Americans with Disabilities Act was approved by a resounding vote of 91-6.
My life starts tomorrow in terms of my legal rights.
On July 26, 1990, a huge crowd of invited guests filled the White House lawn for the ADA signing ceremony.
The south lawn of the White House was just packed with people, thousands of people. Every disability imaginable was there. And the spirit, I mean, it was just very, very celebratory. Everybody was having a ball.
It was hot and humid, and we'd been waiting and waiting and waiting for this ceremony to begin, and all of a sudden, a cool breeze blew across the gathering, and I imagined this breeze blowing discrimination away.
And on your behalf, as well as the behalf of this entire country, I now lift my pen to sign this Americans with Disability Act and say, let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down. God bless you all.
After the ADA had passed, I was getting dressed and the TV was on. And all of a sudden I realized I could understand the local news. That was because it was captioned. It was a moment when I realized that life is going to change.
So every time I go into my bank and there's an automatic door opener, I always think of Pat. The various people who were really in the trenches every single day, organizing the community, was one of those once-in-a-lifetime chances.
I'm grateful for the ADA. I pushed for it, I fought for it, I went to jail for it. But the ADA is the floor. It's not the ceiling.
When I go out in the streets, I may be a representative of the President of the United States, but the taxis pass me by just the same as everybody else who's in a wheelchair.
Almost 2 out of 3 adults with disabilities are not in the workforce. Think about that. That's a blight on our national character.
We still tell people that they cannot have more than $2,000 in their checking account at any one day, and that is barbaric. And it's the one that kind of gets my goat more than anything else, because that's a government decision that the government refuses to change.
ADA is not perfect. It's far from perfect. It is up to the next generation after mine to make it better.
I remember once seeing a bumper sticker on the back of somebody's wheelchair that simply said, riffing off of Star Trek, to boldly go where everybody else has gone before. At the end of the day, that's all we're asking for.
Ladies and gentlemen, while the panel is assembling, you recall that I said when Debbie Dingell comes here, I will recognize her. She's here. Debbie Dingell is an extraordinary member of Congress. And her husband, John Dingell, was also an extraordinary member of Congress and was dedicated to the health of every American, and was one of the first people to introduce major health care legislation. He was also the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he also heard from all those people who said this will cost too much, we cannot do this, do not pass this act. John Dingell was there to help.
Film was extraordinary. Let's give another hand to the filmmaker and to everyone who participated. Shana Gazit, thank you so much. I want to start with you for just a moment to ask you what inspired you to make this film. The timing, of course, is perfect. It is the 35th anniversary, but where did the idea come from?
Thank you. Okay. Actually, the idea to make this film came from Cameo George, who is the executive producer of the history series American Experience. And when she first approached me about the subject, I thought, kind of my heart sank into my stomach, and I thought, a film about a legislative act. I thought, what could be less interesting filmically, and quickly discovered that it was one of the most extraordinary stories that I have ever had the privilege to work on, because not only did it bring to light one of the great civil rights movements in this country, And I was stunned that I really didn't know very much about it. And I've been doing history films for a long time and kind of pride myself on the history of the 20th century that I know, but somehow this had not been told. And then the other aspect of it was like, wow, this is the art of the possible. This is American government working at its peak performance, really. And the idea that something like this could have happened in such a bipartisan way seemed like it was just an extraordinary kind of model that we really should know about. And the ADA is just monumental.
Yes, it is. And I have to say, when you told me you just started working on this last year, in the world of television and making documentaries, it is almost a miracle to pull something off like this in the short amount of time that you did it. So I salute you. I certainly salute PBS, which is my home, for broadcasting this, for putting this out there, and it is going to be available in perpetuity. People will be able to see it from now on, just because it's aired recently, but it will air again and again and again. Let's go back to what was going on in the late 1980s as the pressure was building in the disability community. Tony Coelho, you were feeling this. You are a member of the disability community yourself, your diagnosis with epilepsy. How did you feel the pressure that was growing and growing out there in the community?
Thank you, Judy. As one with a disability, having parents who rejected it, having the Catholic Church reject it, I felt just as strongly as everybody else that something had to be done. And I started working with the Reagan administration and put in that first bill. And then Pat Wright, the general, took over and convinced me that we needed to do the bill with the Senate. And Ted Kennedy was a big mentor and wanted us all to work together. So I felt that all those demonstrations that I just watched were all there and pushing us to do something. But I felt personally involved because of my own situation. And so it was a major effort for me to push forward.
How different was it, and I want to hear from Steve Bartlett on this too, from other legislation? I mean, you have to work on legislation all the time. What made this stand out? What was different about working on the ADA?
Well, when I introduced the bill, you sent out a Dear Colleague letter to all your colleagues in the House. Whoop. No, you sent out it all to all your colleagues in the House. And I thought it would be of some interest, but I was shocked because members would come up to me and said, I want to be on your bill. They didn't even read the letter, but they just knew about it. And they said, I don't like the way that my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my next door neighbor, whatever, the way they're treated because of the disability. And so I want to join you. So when we first put in that bill, it was surprising to me. We had over 100 co-sponsors. And this is before there was any legislative activity. And we put that in. So I was tremendously pleased with my colleagues because they reacted based on everything else that was going on, but they knew it was wrong, what was not happening, and wanted to do something about it. So that was something that was special for me.
Steve Bartlett, we feel so acutely today the partisanship in this city. Bipartisanship was a hallmark of getting this done. How did you feel the R versus D divide at that time? How great was it? How much of an obstacle was it at the time?
Well, this was beyond bipartisanship. Bipartisanship, we call it that because we're missing that now in the Congress. But this was actually much more of a majority of the House and the Senate in their hearts and their guts. They knew kind of that this was the right thing to do. They didn't know how to get there. They weren't sure it could, many didn't know it could be done. And so it had to be legislated. So I would call this more constitutional. It was James Madison. It was the checks and balances as people sat down and figured out how to achieve it. The negotiating sessions that Steny and I had, we had, I think Steny's staff counted 100 hours of direct negotiations. But it wasn't just Steny and myself. We had the groups in the room. Pat Wright was in the room, but so was the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Labor Policy Association, and we dealt with each issue as how can this problem be solved. And then, bless their hearts, we had to go and face the subcommittee and committee chair and ranking members who had their own ideas. So it was legislating at its heart, but it was beyond bipartisan. It was constitutional. It was the way the Congress should work, and when it works, it's a beauty to behold. And now we're not in a time where it works.
Was it not the norm to have both sides in the room at the same time? You were saying a minute ago that as you said, you had the Chamber of Commerce, and then you had advocates, fierce advocates for the ADA on the other side.
It was not the norm to have them in the room. But we knew, Steny and I both knew that they had to be in the room because we had to deal with them eventually. So we may as well hear what they had to say as we're writing the bill. Pat Wright was, of course, we did call her the general. She was a genius. She didn't say much unless we were about to kind of walk off the edge, and then she careful guys. But then Pat would go back to the groups and say, this is what we did today, and you better like it. And sometimes they didn't, and she'd come back the next day and say, well, this one didn't quite pass muster. But anyway, that was not the norm. The norm was much more in committee and staff and to working out the details. But this was one that the members and the groups and the interest groups themselves worked out the details.
I'm asking these questions because so much of what happens in the Congress, yes, it's the committee work is in front of cameras at times, but so much of the real work is done behind a curtain. People don't see it. And I would love for people to understand more about what happened. Debbie Dingell, you were not yet in the Congress when all this was going on, but you were married to John Dingell, who was very involved in so many ways in what was happening. What was your sense? I mean, you were in Washington, you were watching this closely. What was your sense of what was going on at the time?
I probably was a pretty close observer, actually. I kind of did what Tony told me to tell John to do. They think I'm kidding. But John did care, but Steny and, all three of you were so instrumental in working with the groups and then taking it to the committee. And Tom Harkin is another person who was very much involved. John and Teddy were very close and did a lot of things together, but they really respected all three of you. And it needed to happen. It took a long time. There was a lot of negotiating, a lot of tough conversations, and we just tried. I remember with Tony just trying to raise awareness of disability issues and what they were, and Steny, back in those days.
What was Steny? Representative Hoyer.
Steny works.
What was different about this? I mean, you all deal with all types of legislation. What made this different? I mean, you did have people literally crawling up the steps of the Capitol. That gave it an urgency and an emotional component because the American people were watching that on television. But from your perspective, what was different, and what ultimately do you think pushed it across the line?
Well, let me answer the last question by repeating what I said earlier. Those folks with disabilities who had the courage to come to the Congress and say, this is the challenge I face. Those folks who crawled up those stairs in pain but in commitment to the cause. And you know, I had been through the civil rights movement. I graduated from college in '63, and I'd seen the civil rights movement, and this was, to my view, a very significant civil rights issue. This was what America promised: inclusion, equal treatment. And that's what made this difference, because it was such a central issue to what America says it is, and for the most part is. But let me say something, if I can, Judy, about what Steve said, and you asked about the partisanship. I want you to recall that Democrats had been in control in 1990 for 36 years. The Republicans were in the minority. Bob Michael was a prince and worked well with O'Neill, and O'Neill worked well with Bob.
He was a Republican.
Bob Michael was the Republican leader that I talked about earlier. So the context was not what it is today. Because today it is anything that happens may switch control of the Congress back and forth. So there wasn't quite the level, Steve, I think, of the partisanship that exists today. And Bob Michael was somebody who was the leader of a party who wanted to get things done. Now, very frankly, that was also a time when Newt Gingrich was in the Congress. And Newt Gingrich was preaching to the Republicans, as long as you cooperate, the Democrats will stay in charge. So you have to confront and challenge. But this was an issue that was transcendent, mainly because people came, told their stories, and appealed to the hearts as well as the intellect of the members. And I think, although it was, as I said at the beginning, you saw that vote, 91-6 in the Senate, made it look easy, and we won by 300 votes plus in the House. But it was very difficult, and was difficult, Steve, because people were coming to our members and saying, Tony, you know this, we can't afford to do this. We'll go out of business. And although members joined on as sponsors, they were hearing from their constituents about the impossibility of doing this. And we just stayed after it and showed them it could be possible. And those two words that Ralph talked about, reasonable accommodation. What we had to convince members of, this can be done. We're not going to expect something that people can't do, that will bankrupt them, but we must make sure that their establishment, their businesses, their transportation, their videos were accessible to all Americans, not just some.
And I'll ask both Steve and Tony this. What was it that won over, or not even won over, but managed to overcome the opposition, whether it was from the business community or whoever was out there saying this is going to cost too much money? How did you win that argument?
Well, we won that in part by the facts. Okay, we got them. We actually there was in fact by many of the members that voted for it, they had their doubts, and they were afraid that it would cause harm in their districts. But there was a certain trust there. I will say that the role of George Bush should not be underestimated. That was powerful. I was there when he announced this by surprise. I was standing next to Boyd and Gray at the reception the night of HHS, of disability reception, sponsored by Justin Dart. And he didn't tell anyone he was going to do this. He just announced that he was going to do it the next day.
Why did he do that? Why did he surprise everybody?
It's Washington, because if he had let it be known, the long knives would have been out, and people would have stopped it. There was, I know Steny knows a bit of this, but my other mission, in addition to the committees, was the White House, and there was, bless their hearts, there was not everyone at the White House who was as supportive of George Bush as George Bush, and I occasionally would have to go and say, well, we can work it out together, and you can come to my side of the table, or I can go in and see the president. Your choice. Fortunately, they always chose properly. So the George Bush's commitment to this should not be underestimated.
And Tony...
And Boyd and Gray. And Boyd and Gray.
Who was the president's
Boyden was
legal
right in it.
counsel.
All the way.
Tony, what would you add to that? And also give us a little color, texture on the role of some of the senators, Senator Harkin, Senator Kennedy.
Well, I think you also have to include Orrin Hatch. People don't give him the credit that he deserves. But Ted Kennedy decided that he wanted to have Harkin take the lead because of Tom's brother. But Orrin Hatch is so critical in regards to once he came out for it, the Republicans then followed suit. But he was attacked by some of the business community and also some of his colleagues.
You know what won him over?
He told me that as a Mormon, that you, he meant me, and the disability community are considered children of God. And I will always support you in this effort, meaning the ADA. But we had no idea where he was going to be, but he announced that when Ted had a meeting in the Senate side, a hearing, and he announced that at that hearing.
You know, I just want a name, and he was not in the film, but on the Senate side, we haven't mentioned yet Bob Dole.
That's right.
Bob Dole was a giant. Obviously suffered from a disability that he got in World War II. But I think his example, and that he had a disability himself, that he was a living example for many senators in the Senate, particularly Republican senators, of the importance of inclusion.
Yeah, Bob Dole and Senator Kennedy were powerhouses in the Senate. Ted was the most influential Democrat, and Bob was the most influential Republican.
And how well do they work together on this?
They work together tremendously. I mean, they're all the time on legislation. And Ted, I think people don't appreciate, he was such a giant that Orrin Hatch followed him on a lot of different issues. But Ted was such a giant, and because of him, I think he gave the leadership that he doesn't get credit for in getting the ADA through. And I've always said that if it weren't for Ted, we wouldn't have got there. And I'll give Steve credit, but I've always said that if it weren't for Steny, would have not passed the House, because several of the chairs of the different committees were strongly opposed and adamantly opposed, including the Speaker, Tom Foley, who wanted the ADA to be broken up because it was too strong of a bill, too encompassing and so forth. And he felt it should be broken up and passed incrementally through the Congress. And we said no. But those are the type of hurdles from our side of the aisle that Steny had to manage and deal with. And so I may be talking out of school by mentioning names, but that's part of the facts.
And you can.
I hate to keep butting in here, but I want to piggyback on what Tony said about Orrin Hatch. Not only was Orrin Hatch very important on the passage of the ADA, but he was critically important on the amendments. Because the Supreme Court had said what a civil rights issue is to overcome perceptions. What the Supreme Court said, no, you've got to overcome realities. You've got to prove that you can't do things. I say, I put on Tony, I don't know anything Tony can't do. You know, he has a disability, but I've never seen the disability. Does he have an illness that affects him from time to time? Yes. Do we all have illnesses that affect us from time? Yes. But the Supreme Court had made it more difficult to take advantage of the ADA. Orrin Hatch was there when we did the amendments to overrule essentially the Supreme Court decision, so that it was the perception. If you think you're disabled, and if you are disabled, but if people discriminate you because they have a perception that you're disabled, that is wrong as well.
I think Steny just said something that we in the disability community appreciate. The Congress passed the ADA. Supreme Court 10 years later said it doesn't cover all disabilities. Steny and Harkin put in the ADA Amendments Act. We overturned a Supreme Court decision. I don't think people understand that. Not many times does that happen, but our community overturned a court decision.
I want to come back to Debbie and then to Shauna. Debbie, again, as somebody who's been watching this process for a long time, and you've been a member of Congress for 10 years, 11 years, and you've been in the middle of it, in the thick of it, how unusual was it? How hard was it to pull off, as you look at this, what they pulled off?
I just remember how difficult it was. There was still a stigma, which probably is still true today, towards people with disabilities. Businesses thought it was, going to be too expensive. Even municipalities complained that it was going to cost them too much money. But thank you. But I really want to say it was a group of people coming together. It was a very different time. We are living in such a partisan time right now. These men, it was men. Judy helped. People should know that Judy's been really one of the big advocates for this community too. So it's true. But they knew that there was something that was wrong. In the history of this country, it has taken too long to correct many civil rights, wrongs, violations, whatever we want to say. It has. And that's a reality. And by the way, I sit here today and tell you we've still got to improve on the foundation that they built. There's still too many people that are experiencing it in too many ways. But these men in the public policy arena knew that it was time. And Democrats were in charge, so it took Steny and Tony and the other men. But we wouldn't have gotten it over the finish line had it not been for President Bush, for Steve Bartlett, for the Republican, Orrin Hatch, who we should have, Orrin Hatch was such a gentleman and a heart and compassion and morals and values and did what he believed was right. But so were you. So, it took the people being determined to get it done. And it took the outside advocates pushing the other people around these.
I'm just going to interrupt just quickly. Somebody that was an advocate that talked to your husband about that he had to support the ADA was Wonder Woman Linda Carter at a dinner at one night.
Linda and I are best friends, and Tony would tell us both what to do. Let's just be real, and so would Steny. But I want to say to you now that while we're getting inspired by this story, we still have a lot more work to do. And so you're building on those that went before you and helped. We got to keep fighting, and there's more change that has to come. So if there's a message here, they can't quit. They've got to keep pushing. But, my husband, who was, he did work with them at the time, and there was a lot of work done, was an outdoors person, avid hunter, avid fisherman, lived in the outdoors. And in the last few years of his life, his brain was there until Steny flew out the night before he died and dictated an op-ed the day he died. But his body, I suddenly had to push a wheelchair if we were going someplace, found out you don't understand what the world is and what it isn't until you're actually living it. And that has recommitted me to the purpose that they all have. And yes, while we have made progress, too many people are still being discriminated against. It's still too difficult for too many people in too many different ways. And we have to keep raising awareness. We have to keep educating, and we still have to push for more policy changes. And that's the challenge for all of you in this room.
And I do want to conclude our panel by asking that question. Before I do, a quick final question to you, Shauna, though, about how hard was it to get people to talk, to give you the real story So often in filming something like this, it's hard to get people to go to the nitty-gritty.
The linchpin and the one who was the most difficult to convince, do you want to take a guess? Was Pat Wright. Pat had really never spoken about that period and really had gone into detail and was, living in Baja and helping to protect marine life. So getting her was really, really critical, I thought. But everybody else, I think, was just kind of a joy.
Well, good for you for persuading her to do it. I want to ask finally, clearly, as Debbie just said, there's still a lot of work to be done. Could something like this happen today? I mean, can we get the Congress together to make further advances in the cause of disability rights?
The short answer is no. This institution is fundamentally broken. It pains me to say that, but legislation today is not done by the whole Congress. It's done by maybe 10 people in one caucus and then make small deals to get everybody else along. And that is not a functional way to write legislation because you don't accommodate all the interests. So bless their hearts. Bless your heart, Steny. We've got to, as a country, fix the institution to get it back to the balance of powers and legislating.
Both Tony and Steny, I want you both to weigh in on this question of what will it take to get further progress made on the cause that is so dear to everyone in this room. Excuse me, Steny.
Tony wants me to go first. First of all, let me say that I agree with Steve. The Congress essentially is broken. And what I say about the Congress is less than the sum of its parts. There are a lot of good people in Congress on both sides of the aisle. And you can have good relations. But as a Congress, we are broken. And I pointed out to you, there was a reason we were less partisan in 1990, because again, we had been controlled for so long that there had grown up a thought that, yes, we'll work together. On the Appropriations Committee, we work together. A little easier on the Appropriations Committee than on the authorizing, because the authorizers deal more with philosophy. If you got $100 and you're in the majority, you get 60, and the minority gets 40. It's a pretty easy decision to make. But philosophically, not so easy in an authorizing committee. But here's what I tell people. They look at me and they say, Steny, when are you guys going to get together and work together and get things done? And my response to them, as soon as you do. And they look at me somewhat quizzically, what the devil do you mean, as soon as I do? Democracy works. And if you elect people who want to work together, you'll get a Congress that works together. But if you elect confrontational, angry people, you will get a confrontational, angry Congress. That's what democracy is about. You can bet your sweet life that every member of Congress wants to give his constituents or her constituents a reason to reelect them. That's sort of capitalism applied to, you don't sell a product that people aren't buying. So that if the American people decide they're sick and tired of a Congress that's just confrontational and demand that their members work together on substantive ways forward for America and for its people, that will happen. Democracy works. But right now, unfortunately, we're a very divided country. The Republicans are a very divided party. We have, in the Democratic Party, great differences, but you will notice in the 117th Congress, we passed everything we wanted to pass. Because our faction, that was the more liberal faction, wanted progress. The problem the Republicans have right now is they have a significant group of people. Steve sort of referred to them in an offhanded way. Significant group of people who believe on their side that losing is winning because they've made their point. And their point is not to compromise. It is to stand up for principle. Most of what we do is not principle, it is pragmatism. America has been a pragmatic country. And we need to continue to be a pragmatic country, meaning we do things that work to the best interest of all of our people. Now, what's the other part of the question? Tony, you wanted me to go first, so you finish up.
Let me take what Steny just said and bring it down to a different level. And I feel very strongly about this. We in the disability community represent about 25% of the voting population. If you add our loved ones, if you add our caregivers, I'll bet we're just about at 50%. And when our community wants to get together, we can be very impactful. When we did the ADA, it was a question of getting our community together instead of all the silos within our community. And we tore those silos down and we finally got it through. Right now, if we want some legislation, if our community, the 25%, get their loved ones to join them, that's one hell of a group to get things done. But the problem is our community is not together. And so while we blame everybody else, I want to say very openly that our community has to get back together like we did on the ADA, back together like we did on the ADA Amendments Act, and raise our voices to get done what we want. Right now, there are attacks, as Maria pointed out. If our community will rise up, I always say it comes from the bottom, not from the top. And if we as a community rise up, those folks in power will pay attention.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions from all of you who are here. Raise your hand. We can bring a microphone to you if you have a question. Wherever you are, just wave your arm. Here we have right here in the second row, this young woman.
Thank you so much for this amazing event and just for your leadership in this space, and also extend that to everyone in this room who's been amazing disability rights leaders. My name is Kenna Chick, and I currently work in the Senate. One of my curiosities and what I'd love to hear from you from your perspective is, what can we do now to mobilize, to raise awareness, to win this fight? Because we talk a lot about sort of the different ways in which, amazing work was done in previous years, and you talked a lot about sort of the accountability piece in voting, but are there actions that we can take today to make a difference? And if so, what are those?
Who wants to jump on that?
I'll take it on one point. The blind community, the hearing impaired community, and the physically impaired community did not have access to the internet. Steny and Steve, I think, would agree that the ADA did cover the internet. However, some courts said yes, some courts said no. And so President Biden, for Title II, issued a rule saying that the internet had to be accessible. But that's an example of what happened as a result of the community coming together. We had over 100 different groups who supported the rights of the blind, hearing impaired, the physically impaired. That doesn't always happen, but when you come together, the White House paid attention on this one. But it's that getting that community together. We have to be together to get things done.
Answer your question? Okay. Another hand. I'm looking. Right here.
Liz, you had a question.
Sorry.
There she is, right there.
Okay. My name is Kim Mushino. I just, I feel like we are together. Like, we just had this humongous fight to push back on changes to Medicaid, and the Congress made historic cuts to Medicaid and huge cuts to SNAP, and they're basically repealing the Affordable Care Act bits by bit. And I feel like we were together. And we were together not just with the disability community, but we really joined hands with the civil rights community, the health community, and a bunch of other, we had coalition after coalition, and we still lost badly. There's no John McCain's to do this, you know? And so I feel like it's different, and I feel like when we were doing the Convention on the Rights for People with Disabilities, the CRPD, I felt like, to me, that was the canary in the coal mine when we were really, really together. And Bob Dole, you know, rolled out there, and we thought we were going to have that vote, and we didn't. And that was the canary for me, because it was all of the misinformation out there about the convention. And I was like, that's what killed us, even though we were all together. So it just, I feel like what's missing is how do we deal with the misinformation, the disinformation, and the powerful machinery out there. It's really hard to overcome.
Debbie, do you want to tackle that one, or Steve?
Just a bit, because kind of take it to a higher level. We can't give up. But the institution, as I said, is broken. And so if there were a vote in the Congress, in the House, about the changes in Medicaid, they wouldn't have passed if there had just been a vote of all the members of the House about that. But there wasn't. It was an institutional problem where the vote occurred as a political caucus as opposed to the Congress of the United States. So that's what, in the next election, we have to fix by the American people holding accountable their members of Congress to, are you going to act like congressmen or continue to be a pamphleteer, you know, and so we've got to hold members of Congress accountable at their elections. Say, we demand that you start acting like a Congress that was envisioned in the Constitution. That was how Medicaid was. Yeah.
So I want to be even stronger on this. This is when you don't give up. You do not get discouraged. You fight back, you organize. What we did is absolutely inexcusable, and people are going to die. And I'm going to fight every single day with my colleagues to organize, to hold people accountable, to fight back, to minimize, to try to pass legislation that doesn't let it harm people. Josh Hawley, who called it immoral but went ahead and voted for it, is now going to introduce legislation. Okay, that's bullshit. You shouldn't have voted for it to begin with. But we don't. This is when you find your allies. This is when you go out in your community and you build crowds. I'm doing unfortunately, the Republicans, God bless them, are keeping us here tomorrow, or I would have done 7 John Lewis rallies back home tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow night, getting into good trouble. So don't be discouraged. Don't give up. Find your friends. Build that organization. Build your allies. Make so much damn noise that they're not going to be able to screw people or kill people or throw people off the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump knows when people are when he's lost the people. Let him know that he is losing the heart of America.
Ralph Neese has a question. I'm going to come to you, Ralph. But Tony, I want to come back because you said the community needs to come together. It's not together. This young woman said the community is together. So help me square that circle.
I think maybe you misunderstood a little bit. I think the community, not here in Washington, community needs to come together out there in the field. If 26% of our population coming to Washington, I'll be damn honest with you, that doesn't do you a lot of good. It is what you do out there 26% plus loved ones going to a member of Congress is what we did on the ADA, is what we did on ADA. That's not happening today. The coming to Washington, as you said, that doesn't work. No, it doesn't. It works out in the local areas. And you can win if you organize like we did on the ADA and Justin Dart did all over the country. That's where it happens. And so, as I said earlier, it's grass up instead of coming down. If the grassroots is not there, it's not going to happen.
Can I just sort of differ with Tony just a little bit? It's not an either or. It's both. That demonstration of those folks climbing up those steps, those 83 steps, was like John Lewis and 599 other people walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. One was in Washington, one was in Selma, Alabama. But they both indicated people who were committed to an objective and had the courage to pursue that objective. So it's not either or. And Tony didn't mean that. Coming to Washington does make a difference, but what makes even more difference is coming to somebody's district office, town meeting, see them in the grocery store, and say, we need to do this. Democracy works if those who are democracy, and that is the people, engage.
And then the people have to show up at those. Ralph Neese.
Ralph Neese worked for Pat Wright, like all of us. All of us did.
Absolutely.
That's right. I said that earlier.
And thank you all. Judy, just a minute or two. As some in this room know, you all know, I had the privilege of being the CEO of the legislative arm of the Civil Rights Movement for a couple of decades, as well as being Senator Brooks' chief counsel, the first black American to be popularly elected to the United States Senate. But I had innumerable opportunities to work hard on behalf of civil rights legislation, and all the civil rights laws, with all of your help, were strengthened during the Reagan-Bush administrations. But the proudest moment of my life, the most important, not only the most important legislation, as I said on screen, enacted since 1965, but the most important moment for so many of us, and some of you have said this, in our professional lives. I also got to do it with my wife, fiance at the time, Katie Bainese, who was the number 2 person for Senator Harkin. So that's the number 1 point. That was a heck of a way to celebrate a marriage and have a honeymoon year, having the ADA become law. One person we forgot, and I really do want to emphasize this, especially since he and I were on the opposite sides of so many issues. Richard Thornburg, the Attorney General of the United States, he gave what I thought was the most decisive moment in the first half of the entire debate when he defied the people at the White House on his testimony on June 22nd of 1989. And he said, "This is essential, and I guarantee you we together will craft a bipartisan compromise in a timely manner that will be enacted into law." That, and I turned to Katie and I said, we will get a law because of what he just said, and he can deliver like Steve Bartlett and all of you up there. But it was a moment, and unfortunately he passed away a couple of years ago. And again, he's probably surprised in heaven that I'm saying what I'm saying about him right now. But he was the knight in shining armor at a moment we didn't know whether Republicans were going to be with us. So I just had to share that with everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Ralph, for reminding us about the Attorney General. I think we have time for one more question, if there's one out here. Whom am I missing? Here we go. Okay.
Liz Wendell with the Association for University Centers and Disabilities. And I wanted to say how Maria began by saying that we can't forget about the Kennedys and how the Kennedys started this movement and our network, the USAID, and we cannot forget where we began. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful way to end this. Thank you all so much. Thank you to this remarkable panel, to Shauna, the filmmaker, director, producer, to Debbie Dingell, to Steve, to Tony, to Steny. Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you all for being here.
And let's thank Judy Woodruff for being with us.